Hello everybody and welcome to a new episode of Book Reviews. Today it's not actually a book review because I would like to talk a minute with you on this book, which is J.G.Walther's Musikalisches Lexicon, which he published in 1732 and which is actually a very important book. And if you don't know it, just stay with me for a minute and you will realize that this book should at least be on your computer's hard drive, if not on your bookshelf. So for those of you who are not familiar with the name of Walther, Walther was a composer, organist, contemporary of Bach, about the same numbers. I think he was born 1 year before and died 1748, I believe. I should have looked it up, but it's not so important. He lived about at the same lifespan as Johann Sebastian Bach did. He was a composer, organist in rather high esteem in his time. Today mostly known by his this book, and for organist, I think we all, if you're an organist, I think we all have played or listened to one of his concerti. So he was related to Bach in the way that he was his cousin, and more important than that, actually, he was appointed organist in Weimar at the time, and even also before and after that Bach was appointed to the court. So they must have met regularly and even played music together regularly. So why is this book so important? Actually, this is one of the first, if not the first, German lexicon that contain both musical terms and information about musicians. So you get a quite accurate presentation actually of the musical scene at that time, 1732. So in the midst of Johann Sebastian Bach's life. This book must have been an enormous undertaking because it contains more than 3,000 entries, again on musical terms or on musicians. And Walther was known for having a very impressive library, which inevitably must have been the case because otherwise he couldn't make a book like that. This tradition was followed by people as Forkel, who published his Musikalisches Almanach, which is basically the same thing as this later in the 18th century. But we will certainly go on that topic in future episodes. So what I must mention also, the contacts with Bach must have been quite intense. Of course they were, but Walther was also related to the court in Weimar. He was private teacher of one of the young princes there. So he even wrote a book, kind of manual for composition technique in 1708, if I have remembered that well. So the connection to Johann Sebastian Bach is very important, and it's interesting actually to see that the great master himself almost never, and actually never published any theoretical works. There are some fragments on fingerings and things that he wrote down in some teachings books for Friedemann Bach or of Anna Magdalena Bach. But more than that, he had no time, as Emanuel Bach wrote to Forkel, to go into detail into that. But it's interesting to see that people who are in the environment of Johann Sebastian Bach, they did write theoretical writings. They did spend time to do that. And Walther, and it's just an idea I have, might have been inspired by Bach for doing this, like also Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach would write in 1753. There's another context, but again he writes the keyboard technique of that time and the keyboard technique that he probably learned from his father. And you have also Adlung. That's another very, very important source. Adlung, we will go on deeper into the life and work of Adlung in coming episodes. I have to prepare them. But Adlung, very briefly, published in 1726 a very impressive work on organ building and keyboard building with an extensive description of one of the first unfretted clavichords, surprisingly, this work was only published in 1763 or something. So that might be the reason that that book of Adlung is not connected as it should be to the life of Johann Sebastian Bach, because Adlung was related to Johann Sebastian Bach in a way that he had contacts with Johann Nicolaus Bach, instrument builder, clavichord builder, but also knew Walther very well during his study period. So, and also Adlung wrote on instrument building while Bach himself was very interested in that and never wrote specifically on instrument building or organ building. He was a great expert in that. So it just to say that these sources, they surround, so to say, the life and the work of Johann Sebastian Bach, and also present the musical scene of those days very well. And actually those musical scenes, the world where Bach lived, he was shaped partly by him, because Bach was a very influential composer and musician, and he had his fingers in many aspects of musical life. So he was a very important figure. So that all to say that reading a book like this is a very direct input in Bach's life, Bach's way of thinking. That's maybe one step too far, but it's very close. And that alone is, I think, a reason that it should be on your computer. It's very easy to find on the internet. I don't know if there is an English translation made of this. If you know that, please leave it in the comment boxes, because it might be of interest to others. And to close this section on Walther, and I can't help myself reading what he writes on the clavichord. And if I translate literally from German here, he writes on clavichord is a very well-known instrument, and it's, so to say, all players' first grammar. If you know to play on the clavichord very well, you can play on all other keyboard instruments. And where did we read that again? C.P.E. Bach 1753. So if you can play the clavichord, you can play on Spinetten in German, Klavisymbeln, Regalen, Positiven und Orgeln. That's very interesting, because he says it's a very well-known instrument. If you go to his description on harpsichords, and again, I'm not trying to be provocative or to polemic in any way, but it's just a fact that he describes the cembalo, the harpsichord, as it is, but he doesn't write that it was a very well-known instrument. And so it's surprising, actually, a little bit, that these quotes are never taken very seriously, because 1732 Walther, I just sketched you the connections he had with Johann Sebastian Bach, and it represents really the normal daily musical life in that time. So why doubting the fact that the clavichord was very present in people's lives? So also in that of J.S. Bach. And of course Bach knew the harpsichord maybe much better than the average musician, because a harpsichord was more expensive than the clavichord, although there were very expensive clavichords. But denying the fact, and I'm just saying that because you hear it and you can read it, just dive into forums on internet, on Facebook or whatever, you can hear often people deny the fact that Bach was related much to the clavichord, and you can even read it in interviews of famous musicians. I will not go into detail here because it's not the topic of this video, but just saying Walther points to the clavichord as Adlung would do, and not wanting to make my point stronger than it is, but it's a fact. And more only than that on the clavichord, this book is really something you should have and consult many times, because you will find a lot of information. And as with the letters of C.P.E. Bach, the same here. This is direct input. You have to make your own interpretation, because you won't find the answers to all your questions, but you kind of create, while reading that, it's like walking into their world, and that's really interesting, and that's appealing to me, and hope to you as well. So go on the internet, find this book, or buy it if you find it relatively cheap. I could buy the second hand for 30 euros, I think, inclusive shipping. So I didn't hesitate, because this book, having on your bookshelf, is much easier than on the computer. And if you have it, or if you find it, leave a comment in the comment boxes to share your relationship, so to say, with this book. It would interest me, and I think it would interest others as well. Thank you for watching, and up to the next book review later. Bye.